The Park Center for Independent Media at Ithaca College presents the 2013 Izzy Awards, an annual recognition of outstanding achievement in independent media.
I want to welcome everyone here on behalf of Ithaca College and the Park School of Communications to the 5th Annual Izzy Award, celebrating outstanding achievement in independent media. Our annual award is named after the journalist I.F. Izzy Stone, who did not bury the big news. He published I.F. Stone's Weekly, an independent newsletter from 1953 to 1971. He was challenging racism, government deception, war, assaults on civil liberties. Izzy had been blacklisted. He'd been called un-American, kicked out of the National Press Club because he challenged their policy of exclusion of African Americans. He was spied on and followed for years by the FBI. They couldn't even get him for jaywalking. He remained till his death a worshiper of our Bill of Rights, freedom of the press. He defended everyone's civil liberties, even racists. And given all the high-quality journalism that came out last year from independent outlets, there was one news source that was just a cut above them all. And that's what brings me to tonight's Izzy Award winner. Let's hear it for the nonprofit outlet Mother Jones.
It's been a momentous year for Mother Jones, a huge year for us.
And the Romney 47% video is just the cherry on the top of the icing on the top of a really great cake.
And so my job is not to worry about those people. I'll never think they said they should take personal responsibility and care for their lives.
And was very dismissive and said, you know, these people are moochers, they're freeloaders. He called them victims.
And you came up with this video. It was just astounding.
How did our pal David Corn of Mother Jones obtain and release the secret video?
So I think one of the things that people need to understand is it basically comes out of all the phenomenal reporting that David Corn and some of the other reporters in the DC Bureau have done into Romney's finances, into Bain Capital and its investments. You know, we knew it would be big, but I don't think there's any way for any news organization to anticipate a story going this big.
The story was everywhere. The New York Times, the Washington Post,
LA Times, BBC, ABC, CBC, Pravda, all had this as their top story.
The news today is essentially rolling out in double time right now.
And all because of a small camera secretly recording from the side of a room.
Saying that you essentially disdainfully wrote off half the nation.
The recording was released to the liberal magazine Mother Jones.
Mother Jones distributed it yesterday.
Mother Jones, by the way, put this tape out.
That video is continuing to dominate the conversation.
It's a big scoop and one of the important campaign stories of the year.
I don't know if you have seen the videotape, but I'm sure you know what we're referencing here.
That's the Republican candidate for the presidency seemingly characterizing a broad swath of Americans as a bunch of lazy freeloaders.
Sorry, sir, is that a camera on the table pointing right at me?
It makes me long for the previous 48 hours, which were merely catastrophic.
But it shouldn't be surprising for a guy who says 47% of the American people are unwilling to take responsibility for their own lives.
When he said behind closed doors that 47% of the country consider themselves victims, think about who he was talking about.
With this call in Ohio, it is a done deal. President Barack Obama wins a second term.
I think it's fair to say that some time ago we could actually not have broken a story like this in this way, because we wouldn't have had the reporting staff in place, but just as importantly, we wouldn't have had the distribution capability in place. We made a strategic decision to really become a player in the news cycle.
It showed how the investments that we've made in the past 6 years, putting a DC Bureau into place, hiring reporters when other people were laying them off, investing in technology, investing in digital media paid off.
We've had major projects on climate change issues, on food issues, on dark money and political influence by corporate interests.
Few have pursued the dark money trail more vigilantly than the people who coined that phrase, the hard-working journalist at Mother Jones Magazine.
And all of this investment really led up to the point where David was able to have the support systems in place to get the story out in a gigantic manner.
Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate this. And on behalf of Clara and Monica, who you just saw in the video that we prepared last fall, as well as our CEO, Madeline Buckingham, and all the staff in New York, in our San Francisco headquarters, and in our Washington bureau, and the board of directors of Mother Jones, I just want to say how much we appreciate this recognition. It matters a great deal to us to see our work bear fruit like this. I want to thank Ithaca College, the Park Center for Independent Media, and the Park Foundation, and all our friends here in the Ithaca community for your support. I wanted to say just a couple of things. I'll try to keep it very short so that Kate and David maintain your attention. I came across a quote from a guy named John Fullerton, who's a former J.P. Morgan managing director who woke up a few years ago and decided that that was not the world for him. And he left and began working using his financial skills on how to reform the financial system to take health of the globe and climate protection into account. And he wrote a post recently about why Swarthmore College should seriously consider divesting from fossil fuel stock investments, even if it was true that there would be no significant economic impact or market impact on the companies that they invested in or the general fossil fuel market. He said that it mattered to him because it demonstrated both a moral, ethical, and long view understanding of what fiduciary responsibility is, and also would open up a conversation on the campus. And he ended that post by speaking to the trustees at Swarthmore and asking the question that stuck with me since I read it, which is simply, when you know, what do you do? When you know, what do you do? And it gives me a way into talking about Mother Jones to pose that question for a couple of reasons. The first is that we think about that question a lot when we're working. As journalists, we spend most of our time on the first part, when you know. Because after all, that's really our job. Our job is to help you guys understand the world that we live in as much as we can understand it in a deep sense, to go beyond the cable news chatter and the confusing way in which news bits are reported, and try to give a deeper contextual understanding of the world we live in, to give it to you in a way that is understandable, that has a human face on it, and that provides you with something of use that you can choose then to put into action to make the world a better place. But we also live in the second part of that question, the what do you do part. Because our mission at Mother Jones is to produce revelatory journalism that in its power and reach informs and inspires a more just and democratic society. That's why this organization exists. The journalism is the means to achieving that larger goal. So this is what we do. And this is why this award matters to all of us so much. The other thing that Fullerton's post reminded me of is the importance of our community of support. As you heard from Clara and Monica in this video, and as we'll all mention in one way or another, journalism is in a tremendous state of flux.
And just a couple of numbers to throw at you. There are 30% fewer newsroom employees in American newspapers this year than there were in the year 2000. And for the first time since 1978, there are less than 40,000 full-time professionals working in American newspapers for the first time since 1978. There is this enormous change happening in the way in which we produce and consume and create news and information. That's the hard part. But at the same time, we are living in an extraordinary moment for journalism. Anyone who has one of these things, I was going to take a picture, but it's a little dark in here. Anyone who has one of these things can commit acts of journalism. They may be of better or lesser quality, but you can get it out there, and they are invaluable to this deep kind of democratizing impulse that we see in the way that people use the new tools that we have available, both for professional journalists like those of us at Mother Jones, but for everyone. And that's what makes the moment we're in for us so exciting. Without a community of support, of people who care about the work that we do, we would not be in a position to test out the proposition that Mother Jones can move into the future as a new anchor institution in American journalism to demonstrate how it's done right. We would not be here without your support, quite literally. Jeff mentioned a couple of numbers that are worth repeating, and also to kind of clarify some of the information in the program. So 200,000 paid subscribers in the magazine, roughly 4 million unique visitors a month to our website, 100 million page views last year to our digital sites, which is double what it was the year before. And in some senses, most importantly, we were fortunate to receive support from just under 39,000 individual contributors last year. So the result of that is that roughly half of our support comes from people, from individuals. The other half is the kind of traditional advertising and subscription revenue. But roughly half is from folks like you making important gifts of whatever size works for you. And that's what makes this reporting possible. It really is part of the future of American journalism, to connect with and be a part of a larger community of interest. So we call it a hybrid business model, but really what it is about the relationship between an organization, its staff, its board, and that larger community. So that gives us the ability then to answer the question, when you knew, what did you do? This is what we do. We do it together. And for all of us at Mother Jones, thank you very much for this award.
Well, it's an honor and a pleasure to be back in Ithaca. I spent a wonderful 4 years here. Sometimes I think about what my life might be like if I hadn't come to Ithaca, if I hadn't had the support of as many professors and staff here at the college. But I honestly can't picture where I would be at all if I hadn't come from here. I want to say thank you to too many people to name concisely. In particular, I want to thank Jeff and Mara from the Park Center for Independent Media. I want to thank the Park Scholar Program and the Park Foundation, for whom, without that, I would not have come to Ithaca in the first place. I just wanted to say thank you, because I would not be here without that. I think Ithaca is also responsible for me eventually ending up at Mother Jones. I discovered my first copy of Mother Jones while visiting Cornell's alternative library as a high school student. So, because of that, it became my dream early on to work at Mother Jones. The summer after my freshman year here, I drove across the country with 3 friends. We stopped in San Francisco. I insisted that we go by the Mother Jones office just so I could see it in person. I don't know which interpretation of this memory I liked better, that I was so naive at 18 to think that an office building would actually look interesting from the outside, or that I was sharp enough to know that I wanted to work at Mother Jones. I applied at least once for their internship program, I think probably twice, and did not get accepted. But let that be a lesson to all the undergrads out here. If you bug them long enough, they might actually hire you. So I came to Mother Jones' DC Bureau 3.5 years ago after putting in some time at smaller magazines of a similar spirit, Grist, The American Prospect, Center for Public Integrity, and it has just been fun watching us grow in size and reach in that time. There are so many bad news stories about the future of journalism. I think we're a good news story. It's true we write a lot of stories about bad news, but we're actually a testament to how smart journalism can do well today, and that people still want hard-hitting, well-told stories, and that old school media can make it online. Here are 3 things that I hope you take away from tonight that I want you to take away from this tonight. One is that the need for information has never been greater. I mean, now all of you are probably on your smartphones right now. You might be on your Kindle. You're probably on the internet. You're probably transmitting through your brain. We're taking in more information all the time, and so there's all this opportunity to, I think, to get good information in front of people. So I think people get depressed about the future of journalism. I think that there is a greater need than ever, and a greater ability to get your stories to people than there has ever been before. I think another thing that I hope you walk away from this feeling is that if you put passion into what you're doing in journalism, you get passion back from your audience as well. One of the things I like about Mother Jones is that we're not, we don't come at these stories as disinterested parties. We're coming in because we care about the stories. We think they're important. We think they need to be told, and we care about telling them well. And I think we get that back from our audience too. As Steve said, we have a huge body of individual donors. We have a number of different supporters, subscribers, people who read online, people who give us money. And I think they put a passion into us because they know that the work we're putting out, we put our passion into it as well. And I think that also comes through in the way we write about things. We write about things in a way that we hope makes people care about them and hopefully inspires them to take the next step on their own. And the third thing I want to say is I think that we talked about this a little bit earlier in some of our different discussions with people on campus, is that given the current state of the media, it actually gives an opportunity for places like Mother Jones, I think, to get a lot more attention than we've ever gotten before, because it's a very small d democratic environment. If you tell a good story, it doesn't really matter where you tell it. It has an ability to rise to the top and to get attention in a big way. And so I think it really has created a place for people like Mother Jones to reach a really much broader audience than we ever have before. And that makes me really optimistic about the future, despite some of the hardships in media today.
I first became acquainted with Izzy Stone when I saw a movie about him in college, and I hope it sort of required watching up here. It was a documentary made, and I just remember, I haven't seen it probably in 20, 30 years now, but I remember him, the way he read the newspaper is what impressed me the most. He didn't read the newspaper. He didn't just devour the newspaper. He cut it up. He'd rip it, every page, and the clips would go flying and somehow magically land in the right folders. This was before the days of Google, when actually if you saw a piece of information somewhere, you had to retain it physically in a file to access it later. You couldn't do it just by typing into a computer, which didn't exist then anyway. And he was this little, kind of elfin character who had thick glasses, who just seemed to be able to see stories that were right in front of him, but were different than how they were being presented at that moment in time. He had this great line. He said, "The Washington Post is a great newspaper. You'll never know on what page you'll find a front page story." And he was right. I mean, he would just dig through this stuff, and he would roam the halls of the old executive office building and other agencies in Washington back in the days when you could do that without being arrested, and just sort of poke his head in and say, "I'm Izzy Stone, what do you have on, this, on the latest budget thing, this, the other thing," and just come home with reams of paper and, and then start going through them. That's why his eyes got so bad, I think. And, would come up with these great stories. He was often about primary source material and looking up, and looking up material that other people weren't doing and breaking stories that way. When I was an intern at the Nation magazine ages ago, I had some research task. I don't remember what it was, but I had to go to the library and look through microfilm. Anyone here know what microfilm is? Remember microfilm? Oh, God, and you have to, the sprockets, just lining up the sprockets and finding it. And it was a project that was supposed to take a day or two, but it took me actually a week, because it turned out in the drawer of the New School Library of the whatever I was looking at, whatever newspaper, the same drawer were all these microfilm copies of I.F. Stone's Weekly. And so I would just grab out random dates, just put them in these machines and just push the button down and just stop and just read for a few pages. And I get so lost in this that I remember coming back, at the end of the week, and Victor Navasky, the editor of The Nation, said, "That was the longest time you took to, find 5 articles for me." And I said, "Well, it's microfilm. It was difficult." And then when I became Washington editor of The Nation magazine in the late 80s, I was quite honored, because it was actually, I think as Jeff mentioned, a job that, one of the many jobs that Izzy had held. And I think, if I recall correctly, he held it twice, because he was fired or left once or more. I mean, Izzy was, I think landing at the I.F. Stone Weekly was a great move for Izzy, because he could argue with his boss and not get fired. Because he was in a lot of ways, a loner, sort of the original type of blogger, if you don't count Tom Paine. And, he was just always feisty. And so I got to know him a little when I moved to Washington to take this job. And I remember I was at a lunch one day with him and Victor Navasky, and the Iran-Contra scandal was breaking at the time. And I basically had just gotten to Washington, and I had proposed to Victor, the editor of The Nation, that I more or less cover this full time, which is something that The Nation magazine really didn't do much of in those days, sort of news in a sort of a regular way. And he said to me, well, all the other newspapers will be covering it, and all the news, I don't know if that's the best use of your time. I said, well, I really think it's important. I think there's a lot of material that's going to come out that won't otherwise be, get the attention it deserves. And he said, well, he kind of pushed back hard. He said, well, I'm not really sure. And Izzy, just piped up and said, Victor, let him do it. And I said, Victor just like, whoa. He goes, I have found that when you let a reporter report on what they want to report on, they'll do a much better job than reporting on what you want them to report on. And really, I thank Izzy to this day, because I looked at Victor realizing that he could not say no to Izzy Stone. So I said, "Okay, Victor," and he looked at Izzy and said, "Okay." And it was a great experience for me, because it was indeed the type of scandal that was getting sort of front page attention, but at the same time there was so much going on. It was like an onion that you pulled back the different layers, and you'd find out, wait a second, there's, Contra drug CIA connection here. There are all these other things that sort of being, intimated by some of the witnesses and the information coming out, but yet it's not really being picked on by the traditional media covering this. And that sort of showed, really the only piece of advice that Izzy ever gave me was, if you go to the hearing, stay to the end. All the good stuff happens at the end. And I said, really? He goes, oh yeah, 3, 4, 5 hours, stay to the end. So I started going to these hearings, and some congressional hearings are really dull. And I would sit there, I'd look at the clock, and I go, Izzy said stay, Izzy said stay, Izzy said stay. And it turned out with the Iran-Contra hearings, which were not dull, but at the end of the day, and a lot of times people would leave. Reporters in those days really had one deadline a day. That was basically the afternoon deadline to get the very late edition, basically the morning edition, out. So they would start to leave at 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, even if the hearings were still going, no matter what was coming up, because they had to meet this deadline. So I would stick around, and a lot of times the secondary witnesses were just as interesting, if not more interesting, but more important, at the end of every day, I still can't believe they did this. Committee aides would come out and say, here's all the documents we referred to today, and here are all the documents that we didn't have time to get to. And they would hand you literally, 300, 200, 100 pages of formally classified documents. And I would, and all these other reporters are all filing their news of the day story. Today, Oliver North said this. Today, that said that. Which were, important. People have to do that. But I'd go home, to my very sparsely furnished apartment, and just read through all this stuff. And also, I didn't have to blog. I didn't have to tweet. I didn't have a website to put this stuff on at those days. So I would have like a day, I'd say, here's like a whole document outlining a whole scheme to get around the prohibition on sending arms to the Contras, which were sort of a secret army that the Reagan administration was supporting in Nicaragua when Congress said you couldn't. But here's a whole other scheme that we really haven't heard anything about yet. I'd get on the phone, call some people, talk to the investigators on the committee, who would say to me things like, we were hoping somebody would notice that document. We just couldn't have time to do it, or the Republicans didn't want us to bring this up because it involved some folks that didn't want to get into trouble. And I ended up having, scoop after scoop on a weekly basis, not on a daily basis, by covering the hearings. But it really, to this day, I still hear Izzy's voice saying, stay to the end. Stay to the end, which now I take to mean, stay longer, put in that extra amount of time, make that extra phone call. And it's kind of relevant, I think, in a way, to what led to the 47% story. And if you don't mind, I'll talk about that a little bit. I didn't think you'd mind. And it really started because a fellow I knew who used to be a reporter, who got kind of fed up with, and he worked for some very big outfits in Washington. He got kind of fed up with not being able to do what he wanted to do, which was just really investigative reporting, partly because these places don't have the resources anymore and they don't want to give people time to do in-depth stuff. And he became a private researcher, had opened up an investigative service, and he called me up. And he said, I have a story that I don't think anybody else will really be interested in, which right away I say, yeah, thanks. No, because but he thinks, but I think you might be interested in this. There's a reason to be interested in this. And it involved, this was, I forget, in May of last year or so, May, I think. And it involved Mitt Romney and an investment that Bain had made in a medical waste company called Stericycle. Stericycle had a sort of checkered past with lots of health and safety and environmental violations, some of which happened before Romney bought it, or Bain bought it, some afterwards. But in any event, it was kind of interesting. What also was interesting was that it more recently, in recent years, had become a target of protest from anti-choice groups, anti-abortion rights activists, because Stericycle was collecting medical waste from abortion facilities. So here, so they were making the argument that Mitt Romney had invested in a company that was profiting off the abortion trade. I started looking at it into this, and then I quickly found that friends of mine at the Huffington Post had done a story on this 2 months earlier. So I called up my friend and I said, or emailed or whatever I did. I said, I think this story has been done. He goes, you may be right, but it didn't get a lot of attention, and I thought it deserved another look. So I said, well, okay, let me poke around a little more. And I went looking for some of the SEC, Securities Exchange Commission documents about the sort of the Bain deal that gave them, I forget now, 30, 50% of the company. and discovered that Mitt Romney had signed the paperwork for all this and had been really involved and was named the controlling shareholder of the company at a time when his campaign said he was no longer really involved, that he had resigned from Bain to go deal with the Olympics. And you remember that became a point of contention during the campaign when he really left Bain because his company had been involved in some deals that involved outsourcing and offshoring that he didn't want to be associated with because that was, not the way you create jobs in America by sending them to China. So I discovered by looking at these documents, wait a second. He resigned in February of 1999, but in October and November of 99, he's signing these documents and he's being declared a controlling owner. Even if he's just doing this as a figurehead, it's not nothing. And he had signed a federal disclosure statement saying that after February 1999, he had no involvement at all with Bain. Well, signing documents on behalf of a company is indeed involvement. And, by giving false information about on these financial disclosure forms he files as a candidate, that's actually a violation of federal law. So I had sort of a different story here. The Stericycle thing was still interesting, and his involvement in the deal was more than what Huffington Post had. But now I actually, in the midst of this big debate, I had sort of moved the bar in terms of when he had stopped doing stuff with Bain. And that became a whole hullabaloo on its own. But then I started thinking, SEC. I got documents on this, maybe other deals. And at that point, a guy named James Carter, who happened to be the grandson of Jimmy Carter, but I didn't know that at the time. If someone came up, he didn't even come up to me. He just started sending me emails saying, I'm a freelance researcher, and I've been looking at SEC filings on Bain, and I have some stuff to point you to. So I said, point away, and we found a whole other set of documents about a deal in which a Bain affiliate took up a big share of a company called Global Tech, which was created to outsource manufacturing jobs here for things like Hamilton Beach, Proctor Silex, and that was their whole business model. And here was Romney, and again, this was now after that magic. Actually, this one was actually before the February '99 magic departure date for him. So he had no, defense that he wasn't involved in this deal. And I put out that story, got a little bit of attention from the campaigns and from other journalists, and it showed at the time when there was a debate over whether he had been involved in outsourcing. Indeed, he had made a direct investment. And then with other people on my staff, we started looking through all these other SEC documents, and we found two other companies that were created. The first company was a Chinese company, but these were sort of companies created by Americans to take jobs to Brazil, Mexico, and China. And he had big investments in that, again, before the magical February 1999 departure, after which he supposedly had nothing to do with Bain. That I thought was going to be a really big story, the second set of stories, because it was just undeniable that he invested in companies looking to do this. And it came out the morning of the tragic shootings in Aurora, Colorado. And he got, completely got overshadowed as what happens. Our enterprise, our business is full of coincidences and vagaries, and you just never know what's going to happen. Everything is relative to what else is happening in the news cycle. So putting that story out, tried to do a few follow-ups. It was August. The campaign was going hot and heavy, but it was hard to get more traction on this. But I was still looking, and James Carter was sending me emails. I got, look at this company, look at that company. And then at one point, he sent me a note saying, look at this clip I found on the internet. And he'd found a short clip that had been posted anonymously and bounced around from a few different websites. Every couple of weeks, it seemed a blogger said, oh, look what I found. And it was, not too long, and it was Mitt Romney speaking. We didn't know where or when, and he was talking about having visited a Chinese factory And he was speaking in what you might call somewhat oblivious tones. I know how hard that is to imagine. About the labor conditions that he witnessed. He was like, there are 10 young women living in a room, 12 rooms to a bathroom. Like, gee whiz, look at what they're doing in China. And there's a gate around the factory, a big fence, and it's not to keep the people locked in, it's to keep all those Chinese who want these great jobs from rushing into the factory. And that's why it's so great to be an American. So in talking about that, watching that, James and I were talking, and I said, you know what? It sounds like he's talking about Global Tech, the company that I first wrote that he had invested in China. I said, we got to find the rest of this tape because there's probably more about China on it. And James said, yeah, let's do this. And it took James a few days to track down the anonymous poster, but he made contact with this person without ever determining his identity. And he put me in touch with this person, and I started tweeting, then we moved to email, and then we moved to phone calls. It's kind of like dating, and now that I've tweeted, can I email you now? But in ways, with sources, you have to build a relationship of trust, and this source was very, very nervous about releasing what he had. But we were talking, and I said, so I really want to know, what does Romney say about China? And he says, well, really not much more than I put up. But he says a few other things that are interesting. And it took me, a couple days to convince him to send me the video. And first he wanted just as, he said, I'll send you the audio and video and all this other stuff. And I said, and how are you going to use this? Can you just write a story without posting everything? And he was very, very, cautious about what he wanted to do. And I kept my goal as a journalist was just let me see the thing. Let me just see the whole thing, and then we'll figure out where to go from here. And I won't do anything without your permission. And so he said, okay, I'll email it to you. So I waited by the email. It didn't come. He said, oh, the file's way too big. I go, okay, can you send it through a file sharing software or Dropbox? He goes, okay, I'll do that. I'll do that tonight. I waited up all night, nothing. The next morning, he says, well, I'm still kind of, I was going to push the button, but I got nervous and didn't want to do it. I said, okay, well, again, I won't do anything with this. Your secret is safe with me. And I don't think I even knew his name at this point. And he said, I said, well, why don't you just put it on a disc and FedEx to me? He says, okay, I'll do that. I wait. The next day, the FedEx guy comes, the UPS guy comes, the post office guy with express mail comes, and nothing. So I sent him a note. He goes, yeah, I still not sure. And I said, okay, well, I don't know what else I can tell you. He goes, well, I'll get it to you. I'll get it to you. So I waited a day or two. Then I, contacted him again. He says, I'm going to send it to you through the regular U.S. Postal Service, and it's going to be mailed from a town where I don't live. I said, the regular mail? Are you kidding? And he said, well, that's what I feel comfortable doing. I said, okay. So a day or two later, I contacted him. He says, I've put it in the mail. I said, great, maybe by Christmas. And then it came on Monday afternoon, and I took it into my office, and I started watching. And as I'm watching, I'm saying, oh, this is kind of good. And Mitt Romney claims that he never had any really major advantages in life. He got where he was not because of his parents' money. And he cracks jokes. God, if my grandfather had really been a Mexican, I'd have a better chance now. I'm watching this. Okay, there's enough here to get a story out of this. He's not acquitting himself too well, and he doesn't seem very self-aware. Then there's a whole long section in which he talks about Middle East policy, and the position he tells these funders is exactly the opposite from his stated public position. That he's in public, he says he's for a two-state solution to deal with the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. Here he said he didn't think it could work. I'm thinking, oh, this is kind of interesting. You know, for the New York Times policy wonk crowd, they'll get a big kick out of this. You know, Romney's not telling the truth, and he's really far more right or conservative on Israel than he's letting on. And then finally, about half an hour into this, and I'm falling asleep a little bit. It's kind of dull, a lot of stupid, fundraising chit chat, talking points, and then somebody asks the question. And this is always the key to fully understanding what happened next. The question goes something like, so, between, in the 2 months before the election, how are you going to get these voters to take responsibility for their own lives? Says a very, very, very wealthy person. And then he launches into these 67 seconds of that would become infamous. But when I first heard it, I said, I think I misheard what he said. I don't think he couldn't really have said that, could he? And so I went back and played it again. I said, yeah, I think he did say that. He said 47% of Americans don't take responsibility for their own lives, which to me was really the crux of the sentiment there. That if you're on food stamps or Medicare or Medicaid or a vet, or anybody there with a Pell Grant, anyone with a Pell Grant out there, that you're not trying to get an education so that you can then pay off your student loans, that you're not taking responsibility for your lives. To me, it was just, it was showing a real lack of familiarity with the world beyond this fundraiser. And so my jaw just kind of dropped open, and then I whistled into my office some of the reporters who were there at that point in time. Kate was doing great work for us in Mississippi about covering the last abortion clinic in the state, so she was gone that day. And I said, I'm not going to tell you anything, but just listen to this and give me your impression. So I played that portion, and everyone looked around each other and said, oh, and I said, yeah, right. They go, oh, yeah, right. And, we knew it was going to be big. I didn't think we knew it was going to be as big. And then it took me, a couple of days to convince the source, who we now know is a very gutsy bartender named Scott Prudy, who sort of outed himself, disclosed his role in this a month, 6 weeks ago, whenever it was, on the Ed Schultz show on MSNBC. But Scott had lots of concerns, and they were legitimate concerns. There were some legal issues that he had to worry about. Would a local crusading Republican DA go after him for violating Florida state law that has one-party consent? But does a presidential candidate speaking to a room full of people really have a presumption of privacy? We didn't know that. But Mark Lader, the hedge fund billionaire whose house this was at, could certainly, waste a lot of money on a nuisance lawsuit for years that Scott Weary couldn't afford. He also kind of, didn't want to be put in the crosshairs himself. This is a guy who recognized he would lose his job right away and be on his own. And he also, quite admirably, worried about ramifications for his employer, the catering company that had brought him in to be bartender. It was, if he came out, would they ever get work again, in Boca Raton? So he had a lot of concerns, but obviously he wanted it out. And the way he's told his own story is that for 2 weeks after taping this, and he went there not knowing not to catch Mitt Romney, but he thought, listen, I'm going to be in a room with a presidential candidate. This could be kind of interesting, even if it is Mitt Romney. And he, but after getting this tape and then realizing what he had, being particularly enraged about the China remarks more than anything else, he spent a good 2 weeks looking at himself in the mirror every morning and saying, can I live with myself if I don't share this with the public? And that's why he sort of put that little clip out. He was trying to get it into the political bloodstream without too much exposure on his own. And then, it wasn't really truly working. So he and I spent a couple of days going over different ways to do this. And he kind of said, can we just put up a black screen and just the audio, just maybe the transcript, anything that would make, give him some more distance. And I was always respectful of his concerns, but I said, listen, as a media professional and as somebody who wants a big story, The biggest impact you will have is video. You show the world Mitt Romney saying this, and it will be 1,000 times more powerful than if you give a transcript, do an audio, or just have an article based on a tape that we can't produce. And I proposed that we blur all the faces other than Mitt Romney, so it would be hard to identify, and at first we wouldn't identify exactly where it happened. And he said, but we had a whole discussion about what I could say about when it had happened. He didn't want to give a date or a time frame, and I said, well, can we say sometime this year or sometime within the last year, so that it wasn't like 5 years ago and Mitt Romney doesn't believe this anymore or anything like that. And so he agreed, you can do in sometime within the last year. And we went back and forth. I'd send him the blurring stuff, and he'd say, I want more blurring or less blurring. It was like directing a movie. Crane shot, this, but eventually, we reached an agreement that would show Mitt Romney, and you could hear his words, and everybody else we blurred. I kind of recognized that within 17 nanoseconds, somebody would come up and say, I know where that's from. So I thought to a large degree this would be to no avail in terms of giving Scott any more protection or distance, but it's what he needed at the time, and the relationship between a reporter and a source is often a delicate one that really does entail a lot of trust, and I had to answer his concerns in order to gain access and his permission to bring this to the public. So it took me, when I got the tape, about in less than a half an hour to figure out when and where it had happened, just from listening to what Mitt Romney said, making references to, yesterday I did this, today my wife's here, and all that other stuff. So it was clear from putting out if you put out the whole tape, you would know too. And so we agreed to put out just, excerpts that we thought were important, but we prepared the whole tape for release if that should come to pass. In any event, as you know, the tape, came out, and it was we put it up on a Monday afternoon, about 4 o'clock, and by 6 o'clock it was on all the network news shows, and Romney was already putting out lousy responses and digging a deeper hole, and I think the story just really took off, and it's an interesting thing. I think the first response that Romney put out was just sort of a written statement that said, literally nothing. Mitt Romney cares about the middle class, and he's going to help them if he's president. And I think the Romney campaign was waiting to see if this was a cable story or something else. And at 6:30, when all the network news shows went on and had this on, they realized it was in the something else category. And that's why they rushed him out, I think, ill-advisedly, to talk about it without being fully prepared. And the story just exploded. My phone exploded. And we could see, and I was on the phone with Scott constantly, and he would say, okay, you can, put out the whole tape. I said, okay. And then like half an hour later, it was just getting bigger. Okay, you can put it out without any blurring now. So we rushed to take the blurring off. And then it was like, okay, you can tell them where it was. It was like the full Monty, like in a penny, in a pound. And it was quite clear that it was going to be so big that there was no way to sort of provide any sort of cover here. And so I remember going on Rachel Maddow's show at 9 o'clock that Monday night, and saying, and Rachel's all buzz about this, and I go, but you know what, I can make other news right now, Rachel. And she goes, what? I go, yeah, do you want to know where this happened? She goes, yeah. I go, well, now I can report. It happened at the home of Mark Later on May 16, 2012. And the story just, it took off in a way, as I said, that I don't think anybody could imagine. And to me, it is sort of the essence of journalism, in that it allowed us at Mother Jones, to show the rest of the world what was happening in this small part of the world. When Mother Jones was started in 1976, the tagline under the magazine's name on the front page was a magazine for the rest of us. And I really felt when doing the 47% story that this was a rest of us moment. If you don't have $50,000 to drop in order to hear a presidential candidate speak candidly about what his feelings about the American public, well, don't worry. We got your back. We'll show you what goes on in these meetings. And it also is, it's a wonderful moment for a journalist to have such clarity. A lot of work that we do involves sometimes anonymous sources, sometimes named sources, documents, and you present it, and there's there's a presentation. It can be an analysis. It can be you can put your own filter on it, and people can argue, well, you didn't get that number right, or you didn't take that into account. How do we know your confidential sources really told you that? And you sometimes have to sort of argue in favor of your own pieces, and you have to build up, through the years, a degree of credibility and trust, so that others, take you at your word if you're quoting an unnamed source, say. But with this story, you didn't have to do any of that. And I'd go on TV, and people would say, well, what do you think it means about Romney? And I said, I'm happy to tell you. People who watch TV know I'm not shy about sharing my opinions. But you don't need my opinion here. I don't have to do analysis. I don't have to tell you why I think the Democrats failed to pass the gun bill today, which is what happened today. I just have to show you. This isn't tell, this is show. And it was what I call journalism verite. Journalism at its best. And it was also, a moment where I think it was, Scott ended up telling me at some point that the reason he cooperated with me was because he had seen the story I did on global tech and the subsequent stories, and felt that I could handle this right, that we had a shared interest in what was not the biggest part of the story. And, the lesson which I've imparted to some of the students I spoke to today, and which I've done with others, is that, the act of journalism is sort of a daily grind a lot of times. You just keep digging, but you never know where a story is going to lead. And in this instance, when I started writing up Mitt Romney and medical waste, little did I realize that 2 months later, I'd have him on tape dismissing nearly half of his fellow American citizens. And so to me, I was looking at in an area which some people had sort of gazed at but hadn't really dug into, which is really what Izzy Stone did, for decades and decades. And it's what independent journalists do all the time. Now, and to me, not because we're, so much different or special than journalists who work for the mainstream media. I'm less dismissive of traditional media than a lot of people, because I have a lot of friends who are reporters who really try to do good work and often do. I wrote a book called Hubris about the selling the Iraq War with Michael Isikoff, a good friend of mine who at the time was working for Newsweek. He had worked for the Washington Post before that, and now works for NBC News, and a great investigative reporter. I think what being independent just means in a lot of ways we have more latitude. We're not tied as much to ratings and circulation numbers. We do worry about traffic and circulation numbers because we need, we have to support ourselves, and part of our revenue comes from business revenue. But we have more latitude to look at places that are either overlooked or not looked at all. And I think a lot of reporters in town working for the mainstream media outlets would sort of do the same if they had the same latitude. And so I feel quite privileged that because of our subscribers and our supporters, that I'm able to do that. And so I could take off. I'm also the boss. I can do whatever I want. But I could take off a few days and say, I want to dig some more on some of these overseas investments about Mitt Romney, without having to, tell Clara and Monica, justify to them why I'm doing this. You can get a story? If not, I need you to do this other thing instead. No, I had the latitude to do that. And that's what makes, I think, independent journalism really, fascinating and the best thing about it. Some people see that it has a different political perspective, or that it doesn't have to fall into the prison of objectivity or neutrality, all things that I understand and that I agree with to an extent. But to me, it's the ability to look at places that other people are not going to. And that's what led to what it was, the most important story I've ever done. And so, and I was thinking about Izzy a lot as I did this. And, it's fulfilling to me because, quite seriously, when I was the age of some of the students here, when I grew up, I wanted to be Izzy Stone or Bob Dylan. I literally ended up with his job, and I'm grateful for that. Thank you from everyone at Mother Jones, and very personally for me, thank you for associating me with Izzy Stone.